When I was a boy, my sister would call me spoiled. This continued well into adulthood, and I eventually told her she only felt that way because she'd never see me pay the price. That, as the youngest, barring illness or accident, that I would have to watch our parents, our older brother, and even her, pass away. I don't say this to be emo or morose. I want to set the tone for the anime Frieren Beyond Journey's End, because it's about connections, relationships, and most of all, time. Frieren's story is about an elvish wizard of the same name. The story begins where the Lord of the Rings ends, a Sauron-like demon defeated, a happy ending for the heroes, and everyone moving on with their lives in an era of peace. 50 years pass in the first episode, which is nothing for Frieren, who will likely live for another millennia or two, but senescence has taken its toll on the human members of her former party long before the first episode's credits even begin to roll, and that, so far, seems to be the major rub of the anime. Time is going to march on. It will leave people behind, while blessing you and bringing new people to the forefront. And this is around the time I usually mention a Western work that this anime is similar to, and as far as the amount of ugly crying you'll do, This Is Us comes to mind. There's also a movie, about time, that covers a similar aspect of the human condition, but in a British comedy science fiction wrapper instead of high fantasy. But what Frieren really brought forth in my mind was Einstein, Carl Sagan, entropy. I know most folks don't get into stories because of physics, but hear me out. Frieren is 1,000 years old at the start of this story, and when her brothers in arms are incredulous that she's so standoffish, even after 10 years of travel and bloodshed, she makes a solid point.
Just consider our adventure. It's taken up less than 1/100th of my life.
1% of my life is about 4 months. Please don't reverse engineer that. And if I worked with someone for a third of a year, they'd barely be an acquaintance. I've known my best friend for almost 20 years already. My wife I met over 10 years ago. This is where Einstein's relativity comes in. And if you're unfamiliar with it, here's relativity in a sentence. When you sit with a nice girl for 2 hours and you think it's only a minute, but you sit on a hot stove for 1 minute and think it's 2 hours, that's relativity. Now, there's debate on whether Einstein actually said this or not, but it's still a solid explanation. And if you consider Frieren's 1,000-year lifespan, maybe she's not cold or callous. Maybe seasons are like weeks or even days to her. If that's not enough evidence, consider that one of the prevailing hypotheses on why little kids can't sit still for 5 minutes is that 5 minutes to a 4-year-old is not a negligible percentage of their life. 5 minutes to this imaginary kiddo is about 45 minutes to someone my age. Try showing up 45 minutes late to a job interview or a date. See how happy they are about that. And some of Frieren's behavior is childlike. She oversleeps, whines about the cold, has an odd fascination with nigh useless spells. I mean, she can blow a hole through a 20-foot-tall demon, but is happy to magically perform menial labor for spells that can clean statues. Throw in her teenage appearance and stature, and it begs the question, if elves mature proportionally to humans, how old is Frieren mentally? Ultimately, a day to Frieren is a blink, considering she's already lived more than 12 human lifetimes and will likely live another 20 or 30 of those. Waiting 20 years or so between visits to her demon-slaying buddies is like waiting a few months to us. Still, waiting so long to check in is rude to her human pals. I mean, a lot can change in 20 years. I can barely recall what I was up to in 2003. I mean, lots of Dungeons and Dragons, Good Charlotte, Mountain Dew Code Red. But then I see Frieren almost never without a book, or pushing one onto her apprentice. And then I remember Carl Sagan's thoughts on books. One glance at it and you're inside the mind of another person. Maybe somebody dead for thousands of years. Across the millennia, an author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head, directly to you. Writing is perhaps the greatest of human inventions, binding together people who never knew each other, citizens of distant epochs. Books break the shackles of time. I find myself wondering if Frieren is such an avid reader because she can study the minds of people that died before she could meet them, or if this is just the elvish version of keeping a voicemail from a loved one that's passed away, or both. Each episode begins with how many years have passed since Himmel, a party member's passing, and each episode chips away at Frieren's frosty, opaque exterior. Several folks make passing commentary on her hobby of spell collection, and the observant viewer will make note of more than the major plot point magic. For example, Eisen, our Ghibli Gimli, loves sour grapes, and Frieren just so happens to know a spell that makes sweet grapes taste sour should the need ever arise. And the past comes up in less saccharine ways too. The third episode is all about how far humanity has progressed its magic in the 80 years since the Demon King's fall. Even in the first episode, Frieren notes how much the capital city has changed in the 50 years since the peace began. But it's the study and respect of magic that makes me identify with Frieren. I studied theater performance, but I never really wanted to perform on Broadway 8 shows a week. My love of storytelling stems from its potential to make people happy, just like Frieren and her silly spells. By studying dramaturgy, that $5 word for what makes a good story good, I learned a whole host of other lessons. History, science, the things that make people feel and come alive. Lessons that still bubble up to the surface as I live my life. Frieren takes on an apprentice at the behest of Heiter, an ailing comrade, who themselves only took in the child because it's what Himmel would have done. Eisen pushes Frieren to recover an ancient magic tome written by her old master, Flam. Their world's Merlin, I suppose? But Eisen did so because he knew Flam may have had some wisdom to impart to Frieren still. There's those darn books again, speaking through time. But honestly, death terrifies me. I could live 5 lifetimes and still not see or study all of the things that I want to. Frieren's lifespan sounds like a dream, but in watching her journey, maybe she'd say the same thing to me, that I haven't seen her pay the price. I fully intend to finish this series, and if you're interested in seeing Frieren's journey through time, there's a link in the description on where you can stream it. YouTube thinks you might like this video, and if you're curious about the other anime I suggest based on Western media, I've got a playlist right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next sermon.